I know I didn't do a good job holding them to their time, but it was just really powerful. And I've been asking the question lately in this work, how do you quantify hope? And I just saw and I just heard that in everyone in this panel. I think we have time for 2 questions before we have to move on with the agenda, and we thank everyone for their patience. So really quickly, 2 questions, and Rashid Shabazz is sitting right here if you have a question for him. Yes, sir, come to the mic. Okay, Mike, then one more after that.
Okay, good evening. My name is James Matoir, and I'm actually from the Houston Independent School District in Houston, Texas. And my question is for the gentleman from Morehouse. You kind of alluded to the fact that social economic status with the African American students. And one of the things that I see, I've been in Houston for 26 years, it seems like there's a larger gap when the socioeconomic status comes into play for the African American male. Have you seen that in some of the research you've been working with? And if you have, what can we possibly do about it?
So you speak in terms of just income level?
Yes.
Okay, between racial groups?
Yes. Is there a bigger disparity between the African American males?
Intra.
Yeah, so that's sort of complex. So what happens is there is, all right, so if you're looking at blocks of age ranges, right, then you'll have different answers. So if overall the difference between black women and white women, black men and white men, actually the gap is smaller between black men and white men. It may seem counterintuitive, but actually more black men, there are about 75,000 more black men who make over $100,000 than there are black women. Black women are more educated than black men in terms of college degrees, but in terms of income, in terms of the averages, black men are actually faring better. So, and so you can talk about unemployment rates. Yes, unemployment rates are higher, right? But we know this across racial and gender groups that men are going to make more money than women, you know, on average, even if it's for the same job. So you have higher unemployment rates for black men, but if you're looking at income on average, there's differences. So that's why.
He's talking about the correlation between student achievement.
In early education, the achievement level is what I talk about. When they're in school, do you see a bigger gap?
The correlation between income and achievement.
African American not in the upper level of graduate courses or college. I'm talking about in regular public education. Is there a bigger gap if I'm poor African American in public schools compared to other groups?
Slightly, yes. So when you're at the lower ends of poverty, so poor kids do not do well in school across the board, right? Poor black kids do slightly worse than poor white kids. That's true, but the gap is smaller at the lower end. So the poverty piece plays a role. It's oftentimes confounded with race, but yes, the gap is smaller there. And as was talked about earlier, the slopes increase. So as you go up the socioeconomic ladder, the gaps actually increase. But at the lower levels, it's not a huge difference.
Okay, I can get together after this and.
Right. Sorry about that. I'm sorry, I completely misunderstood your question.
One more question before we thank our futurist panelists. No?
Let me respond to that one as well. And the point here is that Gloria Latson Billings, who's a professor at Wisconsin, frequently says that the most neglected person in the public education system is a high-performing black student, right? And so I think rather than thinking about where there are gaps and then segmenting or disaggregating based on income, we need to acknowledge that all of our kids suffer, right, no matter where they are. There are sometimes instances in which, because of income or other access to capital, you'll find us in spaces where we are presumed to have better access to higher quality teachers or more resources, but the cost of achieving in that space for students of color tends to be considerable. And part if we just think about the isolation that students of color find themselves experiencing in that space.
That's a question.
So my name is James Mack, and I'm a Youth Build graduate from Columbus, Ohio of 2008. And we have 263 youth builds across the nation, right? And so we are doing a lot of work with helping impoverished youth in low-income communities transform their lives around, as you all know if you heard a little bit about it today. In 46 different states. So how can we get connected with all of you so we can help these young people that we are helping out in Youth Build?
So I won't answer that question, but I will say that a way that we can collectively help to increase access to programs like Youth Build is to go vote, right? So this is me in my pedestrian space, because as a political official, I can't tell you who to vote for. But I can say, based on history, that the Workforce Investment Act, which is the federal piece of legislation that authorizes Youth Build and a number of other programs, including funding for adult basic education, has not been reauthorized for almost 20 years. The chair of the committee responsible for that legislation, Virginia Fox, who's from one of the Carolinas, said in a public meeting at a U.S. Conference of Mayors Committee that if she were queen of the world, there would be no workforce investment system, in spite of the fact that a significant number of constituents in her district benefit from it. The point here, again, is that we are often asleep at the wheel, generally when it comes to elections, but especially in midterm years. I spent a year working in Nevada, where there were a lot of people who showed up to get a T-shirt or something with Obama's face on it, but didn't register, who missed out on the opportunity to make sure that that state, who suffers significantly because of the public education system, the high mobility, and the lack of business opportunities generally, they allowed that to manifest itself. So I say that not jokingly, but the first thing that we need to do this year is to vote, and to make sure that there are people in office who understand the importance of those programs, who will invest in them as well.
So can I speak on that? I think one of the things that if you were to do an analysis of the most successful Youth Build sites, there are a couple of things that would probably raise up. The diversity of the supporters in that particular community, whether that's business, government, public sector, private sector, folks on the ground. And what we have to do is, because I'm familiar with a lot of Youth Build work, is that if you focus on what's happening in those places and getting those folks engaged on the ground in those communities that are surrounding Youth Build, or the potential to bring Youth Build there, what David is saying will build upon what's already the power, which is the people in that place to drive that. If you're going to hear me talk about anything, it's going to be the belief that the power rests in those folks on the ground. And Youth Build is successful. I've seen it when it's successful, when those folks already in that place wrap their arms around it, regardless of what sector they come from.
All right, Trabian, I'm going to give you the last word.
No, real quick. I know Dorothy, so we're going to end up partnering with Youth Build. But even if you don't want to wait for that, text brother to 96,000. That's brother to 96,000 at BME, and we'll plug you to the BME network.
And I think you bring up a really good point, and I don't know if this is possible with the organizers of the conference of distributing a contact list or email so we can all network and be connected. We don't know all who's in the room. We haven't met everybody, but that's a missed opportunity if we can't get connected and follow up with that's possible. All right, Dory, I'm going to do one more in the back. Is that Professor White? All right, so gotta allow Professor White. This is the last question.
So I'm 81 years old, so that makes me one of the oldest Negroes in the room. And I'd have been through some of everything, starting out in a one-parent home back in 1932. But I was working with some brothers on a prison release program about 6 months ago, and we were sitting down in a group, and they laid out very clearly what they needed to do to rejoin the workforce, to reconnect to family life, and to become a positive force in the community, like we heard from the brother. And these brothers were, say, about 35 years old and had done on an average of 12 to 13 years in the place. So I closed my eyes and I tried to think, how come they can see things so clearly now that they're in their 30s and have spent 10 years in prison, 10 to 12, and couldn't see it when they were 18 and 19? I mean, what transpired that they would have to go there to get that clear vision? Any thoughts?
Yeah, in my experience of 19 years, most of the guys that I went to prison with were relatively young. Yeah, most of the guys went to prison when they were relatively young. What I found consistently is that most come from backgrounds of child abuse, sexual abuse, and other type of abuses that they weren't able to deal with at their young age on their own. A lot of post-traumatic stress disorder, I myself was shot at the age of 17. My reaction to being shot was to carry a gun every day. And again, when I got into a conflict, I decided to shoot first as opposed to being shot. And that seemed to be the consistent story for most of the males that I was incarcerated around. And then there's also the brain development issue, which we don't talk about enough when you think about juveniles who are being sentenced to indeterminate or life sentences. We're not addressing that issue. Honestly, we're not addressing issues of post-traumatic stress disorder. In our community, we're not honest about child abuse that takes place in the home and how that manifests outwardly. So it's a full range of things that takes place in terms of that growth, access to information. I didn't know it was so many brilliant, great black writers until I was actually incarcerated, and that's unfortunate, but it's also a condemnation of the school system that a lot of us come from and that we don't address in our community. I mentor in schools that actually look worse than the prisons that I served my time in, and those are things that have gone unchecked for so long, and it's one of the reasons that I share my story so freely, because I think it's important to put a human face to what mass incarceration looks like. Typically, when we deal with people who are incarcerated, we deal with those who are exonerated or those who were sentenced or accused of being guilty when they weren't. But we forget that 98% of the guys who are incarcerated are guilty, and that 90% of them will return to our community, and that we have a choice in terms of what type of men and women actually return to our community. So it's a full range, but I'm very open to a more thorough conversation with whoever about the issues.
Yeah, and we'll
Thank you,
talk.
Shaka. Can we give our panels, we're going to end right now for time. Give our panelists a round of applause. Thank you.